everyone. Our apologies for starting this meeting late. We had a late council meeting today, so we postponed the beginning of this meeting about half hour. I'm Councilmember Jose Huizar. I'm joined by my colleagues Dennis Zine and Councilmember Wendy Gruhl. Today we have a few items concerning the public safety, and today we will be focusing on issues around the Los Angeles Fire Department. All year, this committee and the Public Safety Committee have been meeting to track the department's progress implementing a professional standards division, which is the cornerstone of the response to the Controller's 2006 audit of LAFD practices. And today is the day when the last position called for in the proposed professional standards division is scheduled to be filled. This shows that the system works, and audit has led to departmental response for the better. If there are there any public comments on this?
No, none.
Okay. So first, should we begin, take all the items up? I don't think what items are not related to this? Do we have any?
They're all related.
They're related. So we'll take up all the items that are listed today. 1 through 4?
1 through 4 related to PSD.
1 through 4.
Item 5 is another unrelated LAFD matter.
Okay, so let's take items 1 through 4 together. And would you like to read them, Clerk, or do we?
Item number 1 is the Personnel Department, Board of Fire Commissioners, and City Controller reports relative to the Fire Commission Action Plan and a review of Fire Department management practices. This item is also referred to the Public Safety Committee. Item number 2 is a Personnel Department report and the CLA to report relative to a top-to-bottom process flowchart of the Fire Department's existing disciplinary policies and practices pursuant to the council motion made by Council Members Huizar, Weiss, and Gruhl, also referred to Public Safety Committee. Item number 3 is a motion by Council Members Smith and Zine instructing the CLA and CAO to report on recommendations to provide increased leadership training for the Fire Department's command structure. This item is also referred to the Public Safety Committee. Item number 4 is a communication from the Board of Fire Commissioners dated March 18, 2008, relative to the Fire Department's 2008 Final Audit Implementation Plan in response to the City Controller and Personnel Department Management Audits of 2006.
Okay, thank you very much. So what we'll do is first ask the Fire Department to come up and speak about a status report on these efforts that we've been reviewing and tracking. Secondly, I'll ask the Controller's Office to, if they could speak to any remaining issues they see remaining from their original audit. And finally, we have the issue that we need to deal with in terms of the creation of an independent assessor position, and we'll ask the City Attorney's Office to speak on that item. And we also have with us our Inspector General from the Police Department that we will ask to speak. And finally, we have the Mayor's Office here as well. So we'll go in that order. But certainly, if anybody would like to come up, of those who are identified to address an issue that another person is speaking about, please feel free to come up and speak on that item. So first, the Fire Department.
Good afternoon. David Yamahata, Assistant Chief, Chief of Staff for the Fire Department. Apologize for Chief Berry being unable to be here. He's back east at the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial. But in terms of the department and the audit, just want to inform the committee that the department continues to move forward on our implementation plan, dealing with the various components with leadership, communication, human relations, training, discipline, and recruitment. We have been very successful in moving forward in the staffing of our Professional Standards Division, and with me today I have Assistant Chief Ralph Terrazas, who is the commander of our Professional Standards Division, that can provide you with a little more detail on that component of it. I don't know if there are specific questions that you'd like to ask in reference to the audit. I'm open to questions.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd like to hear a little more about our Professional Standards Division, Chief Terrazas could provide that information for you.
Maybe if we could hear, since the last time we met, and the last time we met was a joint committee with the Public Safety Committee, not this last week, which was just a Public Safety Committee, but since the audit, this committee's members met, where are we now compared to the last time we discussed this, and what progress we've made, and what are your thoughts on how do we move forward from here?
I can answer that, Councilmember. Councilmember Weezar, Zion and Gruel. My name is Ralph Terrazas. As Chief Yamahata said, I am the commander of the Professional Standards Division. We have accomplished a lot. We still have a long way to go, but we do have some significant progress to report to you today. If I could draw your attention to two handouts. One of them is the org chart of the PSD. The second one is the bullets that I'd like to briefly cover. The areas I'll talk about are staffing, training, and the complaint tracking system, and finally, procedures that we've recently implemented. In terms of staffing, if you look at the org chart, the independent assessor will be addressed later by the mayor's office. So I'll jump down to under the assistant chief. I do have that person here today, Chief Investigator Paul Hayashida. Paul, would you please stand? Paul comes to us with a very impressive background. He was a Glendale police officer for over 20 years.
You live in Glendale, Mr. Zine?
Jumped over to the fire department.
Oh, okay.
I keep reminding him he's now part of the fire department. But on top of that, he has experience with the police commission in the Office of the Inspector General. He's also worked with the state of California, Office of the Inspector General. And I should add, he was with the LAPD Police Commission. His most recent employment with the state of California was with the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation. So he does have an impressive background, and he is an attorney. So he has been a great sounding board for me. He's caused me to rethink some issues. He's allowed me to delegate some issues to him. He's confirmed some of the directions that we're going in. So he's been here approximately 1 month. So I do expect great things from Paul. Thank you, Paul. Going down the chart, we also have to the left in orange is a management analyst 2. That's a civilian position that will be in charge of the complaint tracking system. That's all they do. They track complaints in and out. They delegate assignments. We meet every morning and go over all the new complaints, and we decide who it should be delegated to, should it be closed, should we assign advocates to it. Going down further under EEO and risk reduction, we do have 2 people that were transferred to us from the Fire Commission. We have a personnel analyst and a senior clerk typist. They've been invaluable. They've assisted in the clerical duties as well as participating in investigations. In the internal affairs box, we just completed our interviews, and we'll be offering 3 jobs this week to 3 special investigator 2s. They came from a total of 186 resumes. We narrowed it down to about 20 interviews, and we took the top 3. And under the Workforce Excellence Unit, we do have 2 human relations advocates. They just got here July 1st of this year, and they are a tool that we use proactively to try to prevent discipline from ever occurring, and I'll talk more about them later. Moving on to the next area I'd like to discuss is training. Since our last meeting, we have had training for staff and for the members of the department, and we have more training coming on board in November. My staff now has a higher level of training. We've attended the LAPD Internal Affairs 40-hour class. We've attended various personnel department training classes. We've gone to some seminars on the subject matter that we're now entrusted to enforce. So we do have a much higher level of training than we did before. Recently, we completed in July a 40-hour advocate course for our members of the department who would like to become PSD advocates. We worked with the LAPD people to define a curriculum, and we got very good results from the course assessments. We also showed our curriculum to the junior college system, and we're going to get college credit for the course as well as CalJack reimbursement. So we've actually got a bonus. We're training our people, we're getting some cash back, and they can get college credit for it. In the area of proactive measures, our Workforce Excellent Unit, that's where our HRA people are assigned, we identify issues in certain environments that could lead to discipline, and we dispatch those people to figure out what's going on, to do assessments, to mediate, to facilitate, prior to any disciplinary action ever occurring. I think that's paying off. We've had a couple experiences where it has been successful. We've only assigned a couple cases to them. They're relatively new. Something else we're doing proactively is we developed a DVD, and we based it on the Phoenix Fire Department system. And what they did was identify the issues that were coming up frequently in the disciplinary process. So we've done the same thing, that we had the 6 most common errors we've seen or disciplinary events we've seen internally, and we've developed the DVD. We used it for a course, and we'll be disseminating that to all work locations within the next month. That is a tool that the station commander can use to proactively bring up issues at their daily lineup and to generate discussion on what could we have done different to prevent the outcome that eventually occurred. We've gotten very good feedback on that as well. The next area is the complaint tracking system. We did have the moderator show up and report September 15th of this year, but we didn't wait for that person to show up. We've done extensive development. We've been meeting weekly since January. We've implemented in Division 1, which is 1/3 of our department, and we are getting good feedback from the field. Like anything, the more comfortable they've come with the product, the more it's being used. So we have daily interaction with the Division 1 office, and we're making recommendations as to how can we modify it and fix it and make it better. So that is the complaint tracking system component. When it's all said and done, we will go department-wide December 1st after that training that we will implement in November. To give you a little idea of what the complaint tracking system will do for us, it will result in faster turnaround in complaints. Before, it used to go through the chain of command, and sometimes takes weeks to get to the disciplinary office of the fire department. Now, as soon as you enter in the computer and you hit enter, it goes right to my office. So that's much faster turnaround on the front end. There's accountability in terms of who's going to investigate it. We email the concerned officer and tell them, you've been assigned this case, you have 14 days to conduct a field investigation and to electronically submit it back to PSD. So that's much faster. We do have one centralized system of tracking all complaints. So the complaints aren't filtering throughout the department. They're going to one central portal where we review it daily. You can file a complaint either through the intranet internal to the fire department or through the internet from any computer in the world. So that is functional now, and we haven't got very many, but it is available, and we will be publicizing that shortly. The investigative process required much interaction and effort with employee organizations, COA and UFLAC, and that is what we're testing. So we do have an agreed-upon process that we're tweaking on a daily basis to make it more user-friendly. In terms of procedures, like I stated earlier, now PSD is a single point of disciplinary control. There's not a lot of opinions out there outside of PSD. Everything's funneled to us. We review the information. We decide whether or not to move forward or to close a case. We also have established report writing procedures that we didn't have before. We have our internal affairs people look at it, our EEO people look at it, EMS people, and a legal opinion as to is there basis to move forward if we decide to propose discipline, or is there not? We also work closely with the city attorney's office on that issue as well. Another important distinction from the past is that the advocates now separate the fact-finding from the analysis as to whether or not a disciplinary event occurred. I think in the past that leaned towards less than objective decisions. What we have now is somebody gives us a report with the facts, we read it, and we do our analysis to determine is there a violation of department policy or not. In November, those 3 civilian investigators will come on board, and that will allow us to partner a civilian with a sworn member in doing investigations. And that was one of the audits recommendations from the personnel department. I do think that the advantage to that is that we get some expertise, we get continuity. As you know, our sworn personnel do rotate out every 2 to 3 years, so we want to have that consistency in place after they leave. In closing, I'd like to say that we have made significant progress. We have a long way to go. I do think that the decision to create the Professional Standards Division is a sound one, and in the long run will pay out in less lawsuits, less criticism, more consistent decision-making, and a fair and objective disciplinary system.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate all the hard work that's been put into this by the fire department in particular, but all the other agencies involved. It seems like we certainly have come a long way since we started this process to create this new division, or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it's a division, proposed professional standards division. I have two questions. One is, since we've started this process to create this division, has there been any new lawsuits filed? I'm just thinking out loud here, so that as we're starting this new process, and then there might be a lawsuit that may have been filed concerning some of the issues we're trying to address here, so that we don't want to blame this new, that we're not keeping track of them in the interim. Has there been I'm not aware of any major cases?
Councilman, I would say none officially have been filed. We still have in the pipeline things that have occurred 2 to 3 years ago.
Okay.
That were coming close to summary judgment in various phases of litigation. But we are getting a lot of people calling our EEO unit, and what I see there is that most of the complaints do not meet the definition of a EEO complaint. And once they're educated and informed of their options, and no, this is not an official complaint. What this is a disagreement with your supervisor, and we classify it so, and then it filters out. 80 to 90% are just an education process.
Yeah.
So if there's a significant issue, we bring the chain of command in and inform them, hey, there's something going on here. It doesn't meet this definition, but you need to look at this.
Okay, thank you. And finally, the 3 special investigator 2 positions were to be filled by approximately October 1st, 2008. Were those filled?
That was an error there. It should be November 1st.
Oh, November 1st, okay.
We just submitted the names to our personnel department yesterday. We got very good people. One's internal from the city, 2 are from the state. They do state bar investigations. Very impressed with their work product, the complexity of their cases. And talking to Paul Hayashida, our new chief investigator, we have a different type of complaint as compared to the criminal world. And I think these people are more than qualified to use their skill set in what we're trying to do.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Any questions for the fire department?
The culture within the LSU Fire Department, you've both been around a long time,
Yes, sir.
and it's hard to change culture. You mentioned that you haven't seen an increase in lawsuits, but there's been complaints. How has this new process gone over with the rank and file and modifying the culture? And I think this all started with the Pierce matter, and it exploded, and we saw the publicity on that. So this professional standards division, the changes that are coming about, the impact on the department.
Sir, there's the culture is going through some growing pains right now. To be honest with you, there's some resistance in that authority that was previously located lower in the organization is no longer there. When that occurs, I do the best we can to educate the people in the chain of command to let them understand why we did a certain thing on this particular issue. It's usually when we oppose what they're recommending. And after we have that discussion, I sense that we're getting through, but it's a repeated discussion that I'm having on a regular basis. In November, I'll be training over 700 of our supervisors. And right after that's done, we'll be done approximately December 1st. We're going to go department-wide with all the things we're testing in Division 1. One thing that the system has allowed us to do is to do a better counting of complaints. When I first was put in this position, I was told you get approximately 100 complaints a year. Well, we're at 350 right now, and we're projecting about 500.
These are internal.
These are internal. They were always there. I think we weren't counting them accurately. And many of these complaints don't rise to the level of an official complaint. It's more or less, why did you take my mother to this hospital? Well, that's because in that catchment area, we have to take your mother to this hospital. So some of those are filtered out that way. Some of them don't even apply to our fire department. I was tracking a complaint from a county firefighter, and I realized that, hey, that's not our guy, so I called the county.
But see, the issue of the public complaining, most of the public supports the fire department, and what I've seen in the history has been the internal with a firefighter, paramedic, firefighter, some of the antics that have gone on over the years. I don't think there's a large number of complaints from the citizens, or maybe some. You know, did they, as you mentioned, the transport, or did they do this, or did they do that? But the concern I have is the internal aspect. When someone, because you know the fire department better than me, but there was discrimination at one time. There were no women in certain ranks and positions. And as that's changed, along with the police department, the culture's there. And the concern I have is, with this standard, it's not the old way, the good old boys club, the captain who promoted through the ranks, who goes back to the same firehouse, he was a rookie, and you're living together, you're working together. Then there's the retaliation aspect. If someone steps forward and feels offended, that whole aspect, which is a huge culture shock from what it was years ago, what it was until recent, where it would be handled at the divisional level with the captain or the chief, but it wouldn't go to a formal process. How has this whole aspect been received? And then the issue of someone in a firehouse feels they're discriminated against for whatever reason. They have to cook too often. They have to do kitchen duty too often, or whatever the case may be. And I've been to many fire stations, and you have some great cooks. And I think the great cooks want to stay great cooks, and the people who don't want to cook, want to do something else, wash the fire truck or something else. Someone who complains, I'm being harassed because I have to cook all the time, or I have to wash the fire truck all the time, whatever the case may be, that they have to work in that station, and they file a complaint for some reason. How is that? Are you getting those, or is it a new mentality, a new structure, a new understanding that, hey, we can't pay these liability suits out, you have to change your mentality, you have to change your culture? It's a new fire department from what it was in the past. That whole aspect of it, because you're in an awkward position. I know the police department where I come from, 40 years, internal affairs, those people you don't want to sit down and have coffee with. People working robbery homicide, you have no problem having coffee with them. But Professional Standards Bureau, and Mr. Broad, who's a good man there, he knows what I'm talking about with the police culture. But they don't live together. With the fire department, they do. And if someone in that firehouse makes a complaint because they feel discriminated against, if they get transferred out, then is there another issue? If they aren't transferred out, and the harassment and the issue with the rookies, I mean, that's what I'm talking about, the whole culture that you folks have been involved with. And I'm sure if you go back in your career, there were situations you could have filed a lawsuit because someone said something, someone did something. When you went through the promotional process, if you look back, I know from my experience in the police department, I could probably be a multimillionaire now with the harassment I had. But you know what? It was okay. It didn't bother me. Is that culture changed with what you have going on now? Or is there a backlash, an issue where they're like a turtle drawn into a shell and afraid to do this, walking on eggshells? How's this whole issue coming about?
Sir, let me, you've talked about a lot of different issues. Let me first address the lawsuit issue about complaints of member against another member. Those are the ones that generate the million-dollar lawsuits to get the scrutiny of the media and the public. I tell you that we have learned from those experiences. When we see a department action which could lead us down the wrong trail, whether it's a transfer, perceived as punitive or not, before we make that move with my assistant here, and before him, I would talk to the city attorney and says, okay, we're looking about doing this, or that. Is this the right thing to do, given all these circumstances? Sometimes we change our course of direction based on our past experience. I think that's going to go a long way towards keeping us out of trouble in those arenas. The second issue about somebody bringing a complaint to the fire station, last week we had 3 firefighters at the same fire station make a complaint of hostile work environment through our new system. They did it the morning of a certain day. By that afternoon, we had assigned advocates and we were doing interviews. So we are not wasting any time. We have to prioritize because we have so many complaints in the hopper. But EEO ones like that, where there's a potential of a complaint of one member against another, that goes to the top of the list. We get people looking at it right away. So we're going to get it early and hopefully prevent it from growing any further. The third thing about personal experience, And I was talking to Chief Berry about it last week. You know, from my personal experience, 25 years on the job, I cannot point to one experience where I felt I was harassed or discriminated against. I don't know if I'm on another planet, but that's my true experience. And I've been proud to be a member of the fire department, and I still am. I think we're working hard to fix this issue. I don't discount that it does occur, because the reports I've read, there's factual evidence that we've made some mistakes. But I think we're turning the Titanic on this, and we're making some good incremental progress. We still got a long way to go. And once all these people show up, our new investigators, our procedures are developed, and we're department-wide on the system, I think it'll run a lot smoother, and we'll be very happy with the results.
Because I see as we sit on executive committee, we see the lawsuits that come forward. If it's a police department lawsuit, multi-million-dollar suit, it's a police officer and a civilian, police officer and arrestee. When we look at the fire department, it's internal. We don't see the great number of internal with the police department as we see with the fire department. And again, that whole culture, people get in that profession because they want to provide that safety, that protection, and somehow, you know, we have this old tradition where they dump water on you, throw you out the ladder, and these types of things. So I'm just concerned that we maintain morale, but we maintain it in a respect where it doesn't turn into a hostile environment, and then the taxpayers end up footing the bill. And as that scenario continues, because you're in an awkward position to try and balance that and make it successful for everyone's benefit. And when the alarm goes off, the fire department, those folks jump on those rigs and go off, and they do a tremendous job. But it's when that downtime takes place that sometimes these, shall we say, childish activities that are no longer tolerated continue. How about you? Have you seen it in your career? How many years you been on?
31 years.
You ever seen any kind of harassment due to your ethnicity, your experience, your anything?
I have early on in my career, and I think like you, it's a different culture, different age, generation, so forth, where it really didn't affect you. But I think from the department perspective, in terms of where we are now, is that we have implemented a lot of training for our members to increase their awareness of their environment, specifically with our supervisors. One of the things that the audit recognized was that we need to provide training, leadership training for our supervisors. The captains, as you're well aware of, having been to fire stations, they're our first-line supervisors. They're the ones that truly need to be in charge of that fire station, and that's where we need to start holding people accountable for. And with that, the department has moved forward in providing leadership training, personnel management, so they understand. We need to provide them the resources so they can do their job. In terms of looking at professional standards division, the concern is IA, that negative impact. By getting agreement with labor and management on our disciplinary guidelines, now we have a consistent application of corrective action that both sides have agreed upon, so there really can't be any complaint from either side when you come up with corrective action that has been agreed upon by both sides. So hopefully with that, you don't have that negative connotation related to the professional standards division.
And just one final question on the budget. Is this in your existing budget, or is there going to be a request for additional allocation?
I think like anything else, and I think Chief Terraz has probably answered that, we have seen a spike in the number of complaints. We are trying to handle with the current staffing level. I think initially when we were moving forward on developing the professional standards division, we did make that awareness that if necessary, we may have to come back for additional staffing. But at this time, I don't know if you have any further input on that.
But what you have on this org chart, those positions are within the budget?
These should be funded. These are
Yes, sir.
These are
They
all-
are. They are.
Okay.
The independent assessor kicks in January of next year.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Ms. Gruhl?
Thank you. And it sounds like you've been doing a lot of work in trying to address some of the concerns. And I think a lot of the issues we've had, and there was an article on, I can't remember, Saturday, I think it was, where it alluded to as well that the problem is more the reporting aspect of it. Even with the whole Tenny Pierce issue, which we have settled and is public in it. I mean, a lot of the challenges with that case was specifically about the handling after the incident. And so I know you can't talk about the case that was in the article on Saturday, but you feel that the existing, the system that you've created now, there is an opportunity if this, and in this instance, this gentleman suggested he went to supervisors, did not go directly to you. So is that part of training that they don't know they should come directly to you? Is that again, I don't know how much, the paper, you never know exactly if everything's true, so I don't want to take it for fact necessarily. But how do you relate that to the changes that you've made? Are people encouraged still to go to their supervisors or come directly to you?
Both. To answer your question, the short answer is they have both options.
That's
I did read that article, and Monday morning we assigned somebody to investigate. We're counting on the chain of command to initiate on their own in those types of circumstances, but sometimes, for whatever reason, it doesn't get reported to them. To address the reluctance to report it to supervisor, we have the other options now, the intranet, which is fully operational, and the internet, which is operational as well. If you go to lafd.org and go to comments, you'll find a complaint form and a commendation form. I didn't want to have everything negative. I wanted to have a balanced perspective, and I went to the LAPD website and I saw what they did, and I plagiarized some of what they did. I didn't want to reinvent the wheel. I think that with the multiple options out there in our training in November, we're going to talk to 700 people. We're going to pass out notebooks. We're going to pass out DVDs. We'll address that situation which came up on Saturday. Hopefully that won't happen again. They'll use the appropriate avenues to report those types of complaints.
Because again, I think chain of command was one of the challenges in, that we've heard on other incidences as well, that they felt they could handle it or do it, and as much as you can, there's still a process, and I think that it sounds like you're making that very clear through this, what you've created here in the department. And I know one of the issues, and this may be as we talk about the independent assessor position, was the concern as well, and this was a couple years ago when the audit first came out, and Chief Bamatri at the time said, I discipline my, I make a suggestion. It then goes to a 3-member, this is by memory, 3-member Board of Rights, which are all existing personnel, some of which you've lived with in different places and spent a lot of time with, and that he felt that he was hamstrung at the time because they got reduced all the time, and whether or not there was a civilian aspect of that needed to happen, i.e. like LAPD. Could you address that? And is that part of how you've addressed it in the reorganization?
We have looked at that, and the Firefighter Bill of Rights took effect January 1 of this year as well. And within that process, it basically protects due process for firefighters, and it's very similar to POBAR, the Police Officer Bill of Rights.
Because it can go, you're right, because it could be the other ways. The 3 people could have known that firefighter for a long time and discriminate against him or her based on they've known him for a long time. So it's not prejudging that they're necessarily going to go better or worse.
My thoughts are that we've had 2 board rights since I've been there. So I've been there since January, so 9 complete months. So they don't happen a lot.
Yeah.
They're very infrequent. But because they're infrequent, our chief officers, it's 3 chiefs on the board, very minimal experience. I've never been on a board, and I've been a chief for 8 or 9 years. So very little training on boards. The frequency doesn't happen. So the Firefighter Bill of Rights provides a APA judge procedure, an Administrative Procedures Act judge. I facilitated a meeting with the judges and Chief Berry, and I'm working with labor to look at a different model. The model we're proposing is that a 3-person panel will be headed by an APA judge, and we'll have a representative from labor and management serving 2 to 3 year terms so that they can go to seminars and get training, they can get some frequency of experience.
Right.
And I think in the teachers union, the judges told me that it's very successful. So I'm in that position now, trying to sell that concept to labor. Chief Berry is supportive of that. I think that's the ultimate fix. The APA process, talking to the judges, 99% of their cases never get overturned for a procedural issue because they do it every day. They know the rules. They don't make any mistakes. So in the current process, there's that reluctance to discipline somebody you live with and you work with and you go to fires with and you have dinner with and you play handball with. and extrapolate that over the years of experience, I can see it's difficult, combined with a lack of training in that arena. Nobody likes to be the bad guy.
Right.
So that is a problem area that we need to look at, and that requires a charter change and a lot of meet and confer, and there's a lot of
Remember,
things.
yeah, what piece of that? Okay, so it does require a charter change.
Mm-hmm.
I think it is trying to build a consensus around that, and I know that's not easy, and so I hope you'll keep us in the loop as that's going forward, where we can be useful in that.
Yeah.
One last a question on that as well, which and I know we'll get a little bit to the independent assessor, but I just saw the copy of the letter that the controller sent in response to the management practices, and so I know it was dated yesterday, so I don't know how much time you've had to review it as well. But she differs a bit on some of your items. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or how you want to do
Well,
that.
I was going to call up the Controller's Office next to speak about that letter and maybe let them present that and have the fire department respond to any of through the presentation, if that's okay. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We could ask the Controller's Office to come up to discuss the letter that responded to the latest fire department status report on her audit. Going there next.
Good afternoon. Cynthia Varela with the Controller's Office. Did you want to have just a quick little briefing on the follow-up audit that we actually did, because this evaluation is in response to the department's response to that follow-up?
Yes, that's right.
The Controller's Office did a detailed field review, a follow-up review of the 2006 audit that was done on LAFD's management practices. The purpose of the follow-up was to look at the progress and adequacy of the actions taken by the department on all of the recommendations. There were 21 in total. Briefly, we found in the 2 years that had occurred, we found significant accomplishments by department demonstrating positive changes. As mentioned, there's been an adoption of standard disciplinary guidelines, formalized human relations training program, and the establishment of the Professional Standards Division. But what we did find is that there were a few outstanding recommendations that still required additional actions and continuing work by the department. And briefly, they dealt with the complaint and disciplinary process. Some of these things have already sound like they're being mitigated by the current actions that have been taken by the department. What we had found is having investigators that were there on a rotational basis and also being allowed to work overtime that could create some conflicts of interest there if they go back after their rotation is done and work with people that may be subjects of current investigations. The other primary things that were outstanding was the full implementation of Professional Standards Division, which we've noted seems to be well on its way to being fully staffed. The last few ones deal with the tracking system, the complaint tracking system and disciplinary tracking systems. At the time, they weren't fully operational. I think they're starting on that right now and implementing that throughout the department. We had some concerns about having specific criteria for implementing the new guidelines, giving a little bit more detail on criteria of how to apply those guidelines in determining specific penalties. The last two we're dealing with addressing leadership, having leadership development and training, which the department's indicated today that they're well on the way to completing that. And the last, we had done some test work on the Drill Tower Training Academy and looking at passing grades for recruits. We looked at 2 different classes that had graduated in February '07 and '08. In the earlier class, we found that some of the grading reports we could not verify some of the passing grades for a sample that we selected. The source documents were not adequately maintained. Those were the highlights from the follow-up audit that we had done. Subsequent to our normal process after we issue a report is we request the department then to respond back on their detailed corrective actions within 30 days. In late August, we got the response from Fire Department. We take a look at it to see whether the planned corrective actions are actually going to mitigate the issues that we noted in the audit. We still had a few things that in general, we were pleased with the direction that they were going as far as addressing some of those outstanding recommendations. There were a few items that we wanted to bring to their attention as to continue with some of their efforts, strengthen some of their processes to make sure that they did address the underlying issues that came up in the original report, and then what we found is still outstanding in the follow-up. So this is, I think the department's giving you even a more current status than what they had provided to us in August. So some of these things sound like they've been, they're being addressed.
And some of the things that we got today, as we've heard in the presentation, kind of giving a very factual presentation as to what is being done to create the division where we are. Aside from that, something that Mr. Zhang was talking more about is the overall kind of picture in terms of the direction that we're moving. Are we moving at the right speed given how we function as a city and everything that needs to happen, hiring personnel? Do you think it's the controller's opinion, your opinion, that we're moving at the right speed and in the right direction? Speaking generally, other than the specific items that we have talked about today?
I think with continued attention by the department, I think they're definitely moving in the right direction. I think the comment was made, you're trying to move the Titanic and change it. I think they have the processes in place, and they have the structure in place to start seeing some of more positive results come out of this. One of the challenges that we had in doing the follow-up review is you can't really see whether it's resulting in a decrease in complaints or lawsuits. It was too soon to really get that kind of sense of it, especially since the disciplinary guidelines just were approved in January of '08. So it will take some time to actually see what are the trends that are coming out after those things have really been fully implemented. So I think they're moving. Yeah, I mean, I think they're moving at the right speed as long as they continue this momentum and continue to focus on those things.
Thank you. Ms. Grohl?
Yeah, and I have to say, I think they have moved very quickly. I mean, we've all seen audits in departments who kind of postpone making any changes, and although it's been a few years, they've made some major changes within the department. Just in looking at the controller's letter that she sent, there were just a few that jumped out more than others. The one was on audit recommendation number 5. And maybe this is either a fire department or your answer to that question, which was independence and objectivity, and having them on a rotational basis raises concerns about potential conflicts of interest. How would you recommend we resolve that?
I think we were looking at the investigative staff be civilianized. That takes away any of the concerns of individuals eventually rotating back out to the fire stations or working scheduled overtime with individuals that they may be investigating.
And the chief investigator we've heard today is that civilian, so to speak, no longer police department from that area. So does that address your concerns, at least from the head in charge of that?
Yes.
Okay. And the other, which was formal criteria and the penalties. Now, I know that is something as part of the overall review that you're going to look at, that the fire department is going to look at as far as the Board of Rights. Is that going to be part of what they're going to do, is looking at penalties? Or guidelines, I guess, into that?
Yeah, the guidelines were prior to getting to the Board of Rights, where they would act on something. We're really looking at the disciplinary guidelines have a pretty broad spectrum that they can assess as far as penalties for different offenses. And to some degree, that makes sense. You have to look at the particular facts of a case. What we were, and because they had just come out, we couldn't look at any disciplinary cases that had used those guidelines. But our concern in looking at that was there needed to be a little bit more guidance or criteria that would help the individuals that are going to be assessing that discipline or saying what the disciplinary action should be, to say these are the things that you want to consider to go from this end versus the other end of the spectrum. And that's what we were really kind of considering. I think at the time they were thinking of doing a formal checklist, and I'm not sure where we are with that.
I think Chief was going to, you want to just...
I believe you're addressing audit recommendation number 9.
Yes.
As a person tasked with applying the guidelines, I was very aware that the criticism was of being inconsistent, double standard for chiefs, non-chiefs. So we've had 75 Skelly hearings since January 1st. Every one has been within the guidelines. In anticipating I would have to apply a wide range from a written reprimand all the way to a Board of Rights recommendation, that's a 30-day spread plus the next step of a Board of Rights. I did some research and I collaborated with the City Attorney's Office, and we found a procedure which the federal government uses to apply disciplinary punitive action. They use it for NASA, postal workers, FAA, and basically they call it the Douglas factors, and there's 12 factors that you assess when you apply punitive action. And we do that on a consistent basis to have a consistent manner of coming to a number or to go to a Board of Rights. Those issues are things like past disciplinary history, past evaluations, mitigating circumstances. Are they an officer? Are they a supervisor? All those things are reviewed every time. We keep a file of it, and they will be entered into the disciplinary tracking system, so we have an electronic.
But those didn't exist before.
No, they did not. No, prior to the very first one, I had that dilemma. Okay, how do I decide?
Right.
And it was very troublesome because I didn't have any tool. Nobody had figured that out. But with the City Attorney's Office, they've reviewed it. They've established a preamble. I've shared it with UFLAC and COA. They've approved it. So we're using it, and it's our consistent tool now.
Okay. So that's something then maybe the controller, if you saw that, you would understand, that would address that particular concern. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation and your follow-up review of this audit. It's very helpful for us to keep track of the progress on this. Next, one issue that needs to be resolved quickly is the creation of the Independent Assessor's Office. And as was mentioned, we already have funding for that position starting on January 1st. And so we have both the City Attorney's Office here and the Mayor's Office to speak about the process that we would need to undertake to implement that Independent Assessor Office. So welcome. If you could introduce yourselves.
Certainly. Good afternoon. Arif Ali Khan. I'm Deputy Mayor of Public Safety and Homeland Security. In a moment, the City Attorney's Office, I'll turn it over to her about this particular issue. I just wanted to address the the Independent Assessor, but just generally mention that my office, the Mayor's Office, has worked very closely with the Fire Department in the development of the Professional Standards Division and its structure and implementation, as well as with council and many of your staff. We're very pleased with the progress they've made so far, especially under the leadership of Chief Berry, and especially the recruitment, hiring, and placement of the PSD personnel. As we all know, it's sometimes often difficult to recruit and get people placed through the system, but they've done a very good job, including the placement of Chief DeRozas as the leader of the Professional Standards Division. They've been working very well in the collaboration with the Personnel Department, Mayor's Office, but also with LAPD and learning from their experience on some of the best practices and how to develop this position, as well as the Professional Standards Division, and also their openness to civilianization in many of the positions, including the Chief Investigator. As you know, the idea with the Professional Standards Division was to phase it in over the course of a couple of years due to a variety of reasons, most importantly because of very difficult budget times. The Independent Assessor was initially supposed to be phased in at a later time, but through discussions with council and others, we decided to accelerate that process and implement that position within the first year of the Professional Standards Division. Through the budget process, money was allocated for 6 months' salary for the independent assessor to commence on January 1st, 2009. With that idea in mind, our office, the Fire Commission, the City Attorney's Office, CLA, and others, and personnel worked to come up with a specific job description for what that independent assessor would do. Through those discussions, though, it was brought to our attention that the City Attorney had a concern that the authority for that position to report directly to the Fire Commission was problematic under the charter. And so we've been addressing that issue. The mayor has selected an option to go forward with, and I'll let Ms. Jackson talk about that issue.
Good morning. I'm Janet Jackson. I'm General Counsel for the Fire Department. When this issue came up before the Fire Commission as part of the working group and the discussions that took place, the question was posed whether or not a fire commission or any commission could hire or create a position that would respond directly and work directly for the board of or a commission. So I was tasked with doing the research for that limited question, and the answer is no. Unless there is specific authority given under the charter for a commission to create a position or maintain a position, they cannot create it without a charter change, and that information was provided to the Board of Fire Commission as well as the working group, that they would need to go through a charter change. As the charter in Section 509 currently exists, it is the Chief Administrative Officer, the Fire Chief, a General Manager, who has the authority to hire, discharge, fire, and control the employees unless there is specific language in the charter.
As Ms. Jackson mentioned, there are two options here. One would be to seek a charter amendment through the March 2009 ballot. The other would actually be to hire the independent assessor or create the position under the fire chief, but have that independent assessor report directly to the fire commission at the direction of the fire chief. The mayor has decided that the most prudent option would be to do a charter amendment. There are a few reasons for that. First and foremost is that it would be preferable because there would be clear authority and responsibilities identified in the charter that would be institutionalized and could not be changed by a different fire chief or a different administration. Secondly, it would provide the perceived and actual independence of the independent assessor by having that person report directly to the fire commission with no connection to the chain of command within the fire department. And then finally, I think it's a good example of how by getting this approved by the voters, it would be an endorsement of the reform that's being proposed to have this independent assessor with those clearly defined responsibilities, roles, and functions be a part of the charter that will last in perpetuity.
So what are the proposed steps? If we are to go through the charter, we would have to introduce a motion through council before the end of October, I believe.
That's correct. I understand, I believe the council must take action directing the city attorney to come up with the language by October 29th. Our office will be working with your office and council members to introduce a motion, and of course working with the city attorney's office on drafting that so it could be placed on the March 2009 ballot. I just want to make one point. The only downside with going with the charter amendment is that the planned implementation was January 1st, and we were working towards that with the personnel department developing that position. Obviously, that can't happen if we go through the charter amendment. It would take some time after it's passed by the voters. But it's the mayor's belief that a few-month delay is well worth doing it because we want to do this right and make sure that we have all the pieces in place before we start this important position.
Questions, comments?
I think, I know there's a couple other ballot items that may be going to Rules Committee on October 22nd. So to make that 29th deadline and going to council. So probably does need to happen in the next week.
Yes.
Of introducing a motion in council, so I think.
Yes, we'll be working on.
The best way to move forward.
Yes, we'll be working on this right away.
Sounds good. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. And
Thank you.
I think we will recommend as a committee and support the path of going through the charter to create the independent assessor office. Also with us today is the Inspector General for the Police Department, Andre Birot, who is here to share his experiences and comments as to the direction we're taking to create a very similar position in the fire department. So welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me again. Andre Birot, I'm the Inspector General for the Police Commission. I've had dealings with each and every one of you in other capacities, and what I thought I would do, unless you have any specific questions, is just kind of outline a brief history of where the Inspector General's office, or how it was created, what the responsibilities were when it was created, and how it has evolved over time, because I think that's significant and relative to this discussion here today, and then answer any specific questions about sort of the growing pains that we have gone through over the years. I will say, just by way of background, I've had the opportunity to work with Chief Terrazas. In fact, I was on the interview panel relative to the hiring of Mr. Hayashida, and so I think the department is taking some very positive steps in dealing with some of the issues that we've seen in the press and in City Council. And obviously, I know Mr. Hayashida pretty well, and despite my comments, somehow he was able to get hired. But that, but I think, in all seriousness, I mean, hiring someone like Mr. Hayashida with his background and his experience will bode well for the fire department. Relative to the Inspector General's office, if you go back to 1992 and the riots and the civil unrest in the city of Los Angeles and the Warren Christopher Commission's report, one of the key recommendations was to create an outside entity to oversee how the department handled discipline cases. So when the office was created in 1996, the primary focus was to deal with complaints of misconduct. That was the sole responsibility. Over time, our responsibility has expanded significantly. Not only do we still have a significant role about relative to complaints of misconduct, and I'll delve into that in a moment, we also conduct audits of LAPD operations, including complaint investigations, use of force investigations, search warrants, arrest booking and charging reports, etc. And we also look at use of force cases, significant use of force cases, officer-involved shootings, in-custody deaths, law enforcement-related injuries that result in hospitalization. When I think about the progression and the growth of our office, well, I guess two things really come to mind, and that is collaboration and real-time involvement. And I say that because even going not in the so far distant future, in 2001 when I first started in the Inspector General's office, those two things didn't really necessarily exist. There was a lot of friction between the department and our office, specifically the chief, and then and my predecessor, Mr. Eglash. And there was not a lot of collaboration, and our involvement was really much after the fact, and if we could find the information. Over the years, there's been a lot of changes, and again, I focus on those 2 points, and the most significant change deals with the collaborative process and the real-time analysis, if you will. For example, as it relates with complaint investigations, our office is intimately involved with numerous complaint investigations. I would say on average we would review easily between 200 and 300 specific complaint investigations on an annual basis in the context of our normal working review. In addition, we have a responsibility to conduct complaint investigations relative to investigations against the chief of police. In another specific area relative to the collaborative process deals with our work in retaliation cases. Under the consent decree that the city is under, our office has a responsibility to report on how the department is dealing with retaliation cases. We looked at the policy back in 2002, I believe it was, wrote a report about some of the concerns about the cases and the issues relative to those cases, and as a result, our office worked very intimately with the department in looking and ultimately revamping the retaliation policy, creating and helping create the work investigations unit within the department. And as a result of that, Now our office is intimately involved in those types of cases. It is not uncommon for staff from our office and staff from Internal Affairs to meet on a regular basis to discuss those types of cases, the workplace issue cases, the retaliation cases. I meet on a monthly basis with the head of Professional Standards Bureau, Chief Perez, and in addition, I also meet with the commander of Internal Affairs Group, Rick Webb, to discuss hot cases, if you will. And many of those deal with, not only your workplace issues, but use of force cases, misconduct cases, and the like. But again, the focus is on the fact that we're meeting in real time. It's not as if a case has been investigated and then they come to us to discuss it. They're telling us, here's the case, here's what we have. We act also as an intake point for complaints. So if we get word of a complaint, we call over to Internal Affairs and say, look, we need to have a discussion to figure out what the plan of attack is, what the strategy is for this investigation. Another area that I think that demonstrates the collaborative nature and the real-time function of our office deals with bias-based policing. Over the last several years, as Councilmember Design is all too aware, the department has to look at racial profiling investigations, and we've been intimately involved in reviewing those cases, working with the department to have meetings to discuss how they should be investigated. We've written several reports to the Board of Police Commissioners to discuss this precise issue. And again, we meet on a real-time basis to discuss these cases. In the audience here today is Nicole Bershon, who's one of my assistant inspector generals, and she meets regularly with the department to discuss these cases. In fact, we've got a batch of cases that we have in our office now that we're reviewing, discussing with the department, and strategizing as how to proceed. And so I think, that has boded very well for not only how our office functions, but I think also how we're perceived not only within the department, but in the public as well. Because when they see us working collaboratively and see that the respect that we've garnered within the department, I think it builds a certain confidence level with the community that, A, we know what we're doing, B, we have access to the issues that are at hand, and C, we have a meaningful opportunity to affect change. And I think one example, a further example of that deals with something that we've recently been tasked with at the direction of Commissioner Scobin on the Police Commission. We've taken a role in looking at how the Office of Public Safety deals with their complaint investigations. And in fact, we've worked in revamping their system basically from top to bottom. Ms. Bershon and others in our office have formed, if you will, a work group where you have LAPD, the city attorney, personnel group, and other important stakeholders where we're looking at their complaints from top to bottom, helping them develop their tracking system, their intake, how they're investigating those complaints. And again, I think the key is getting involved early in the process. So to the extent that this independent assessor, once it does get created, I would submit that one of the key things that's going to be important for that position to work well is to have them thoroughly immersed with Chief Terras's, Mr. Hayashida, going through those cases, being kept abreast of the cases, and having having regular and routine meetings to discuss those cases. Are there going to be disagreements? Absolutely, that happens all the time in our office, but you do so with respect, and I think you do that and you develop that relationship from getting involved early in the process. The only other comment I would make is that Mr. Alakan referenced earlier relative to the reporting structure. I think it is wise to consider those comments very seriously because our office was created by city charter. We report directly to the Board of Police Commissioners. I don't work for nor report to the Chief of Police, and I think it's good public policy that way, and also it's good for the public perception. I mean, to have an outside entity, an office that is supposed to be overseeing the department reporting directly to the Chief of Police, I think you run a risk of criticism, some sound criticism.
So who do you report to?
I report directly to the Board of Police Commissioners.
Board of Police Commissioners.
I am at-will employee to them. I serve at their pleasure. I have the hiring and firing authority for employees that work for me, and that was all created through city charter.
And you mentioned the Office of Public Safety, and one of the big discussions and why it took us longer than any of us would have liked to create that Office of Public Safety was the fact that prior to the creation of that, there were no standards really within that, no civilian oversight, nothing. It was just, and then we had private contractors. But do you believe that has worked well in the corporation?
It has worked phenomenally well in my assessment, and again, part of the reason, or a significant part of the reason why it's worked so well, is because they've been so receptive to our input. I mean, they want to hear from us. They want to figure out the best practices possible, and we've had that experience. I mean, it's easy for me to have this discussion now, but this is from 7 years of a lot of growing pains where a lot of back and forth as to what our level of involvement should be. I mean, I can think not too far back where we weren't allowed in certain meetings, and now, we're sitting with the chief when he's implementing discipline, and it's not uncommon for them to seek our thoughts and advice relative to that. So, as it relates to OPS, that process has been working phenomenally well, and we look forward to continuing that progression in their system as well.
Have you noticed since the IG's been established that complaints have gone up or down?
I guess the short answer is that yes, there is a tracking relative to the number of complaints. I don't know if we can make any conclusions that our office has caused an increase or decrease. One might argue, quite frankly, there's been an increase in the number of complaints because the department has been so vigilant in making sure all complaints of misconduct get taken. In my humble opinion, it's less about the numbers of complaints, it's more about how those complaints get handled.
What about liability cases?
The liability cases, I honestly couldn't tell you one way or the other. There's been no studies that I'm aware of that talk about the amount of liability or liability exposure since our office has been created, so I couldn't answer that for you.
Because it'd be interesting to see, since that office was formed for that purpose, to establish credibility, transparency, a good form of justice, if there's been an improvement or if it's still status quo and there hasn't been any change one way or another.
I guess the only comment I think I could make safely with respect to that is the fact that I do think the department, as many commanders, deputy chiefs have said, look, they know that the IG's office is watching, and it forces them to bring their best game to the table. And I think an example of that would be when you have these hot-button cases. In the past, we would have to read about the verdicts. Now, we get the calls when those complaints come in and say, look, we've got an issue here that we need to deal with. We're going to have a meeting to discuss strategies, what to do with the employee, and I think those kind of things help mitigate, I like to believe that they help mitigate liability further down the line.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving us all this insight, and we appreciate your input and involvement in creating this
My pleasure.
Independent Assessor Office, since you've been working in the trenches doing it for the police department. So thank you very much, and thank you for being here. Colleagues, so we'll work with the mayor's office on introducing a motion soon, this week, to create the Independent Assessor's Office. I understand we still need to develop a final class specification, so we'll also work with the CLA's office on that, and we need to hear back at some point from the Personnel Department on the class specification, the recruitment plan for the independent assessor position, subject to voter approval of the ballot measure. So we'll move on that right away. Okay.
Mr. Chair, to ensure this item can move forward on time, the CLA also recommends to formally request the city attorney to prepare that ballot language, and that this this item can also be referred to the Rules Committee.
Okay.
As well.
So you wouldn't have to introduce a separate motion, you would just direct them?
We do those simultaneously, or do we need the motion?
All at once here.
Right now?
Oh, we could do it. Okay, let's do that. That's quicker, right? And more.
We can work with the city
The
attorney.
mayor's office, okay with that? We could actually direct it from the committee today.
That should be fine, and we'll work together with the city attorney's office and council.
Okay, sounds good. City
Here
attorney.
comes Pete.
Peter. Peter, always setting barriers for us, huh?
Typically, we like and expect to have some direction from council to prepare a charter amendment before we undertake. It can involve a tremendous amount of work and a lot of give and take with the various offices. So we look for that, the definitions and the scope to be provided to us.
Let's do
before we
this.
undertake it.
It's cleaner, safer. Let's just introduce the motion on Friday. Okay, the CLA work
would
with us
recommend
on an
that.
expedited manner, and we'll introduce that motion on Friday in council. And we will work with the council president's office to immediately refer that to the Rules Committee and to the Public Safety Committee. So
And based on that motion, we obviously could start doing the initial drafting and scoping it out
we
as
just
well.
start working
Yeah.
here. All the parties that need to
It's
be
not that we're
involved
not
are
aware
here
of it.
today. We know what direction we're going. I can't conceive that the council wouldn't want to move in that direction and act upon that as quickly as possible. So I think we'll be okay.
Thank you.
We'll just do it safer, cleaner, nobody could come back, no other council member could come back and say, what are you guys doing as a committee? So, okay.
I think you made it clear.
All right, thank you.
So just for the record, Mr. Chair, items 1 to 4 will be continued.
Yes, we'll get an update at some point on the implementation of the recommendations from the Controller's Office and the implementation of the Professional Standards Division. So you'll hear this at some point. Thank you. We have one more item concerning the fire department. So if we could do that item now.
Item number 5 is a communication from the Controller's Office dated May 6, 2008, relative to the report entitled Review of Internal Controls at the Los Angeles Fire Department.
Thank you. Controller's Office.
Good afternoon. Rick Degucci, Controller's Office. Our audit report was issued on May 6, 2008. The purpose of the audit was to determine if the department maintains effective internal controls over its operations. The audit covered the period from July 2006 to February 2008. I'll quickly go through some of the key findings. First of all, the department did not have procedures in place to ensure that for all emergency ambulance billing services that a billing actually occurred. The department's working on a data capture system that hopefully will resolve this problem, but the system's not expected to be implemented for approximately about a year. In the meantime, we believe that there should be some procedures in place on an interim basis to ensure, at least on a sample basis, that a billing is occurring for every service provided. The department does have exception reports that it can generate. At the time of our review, there were no policies and procedures to ensure that those reports were being worked. Secondly, several fees have not been updated for several years. For example, spot check fees were last updated in 1994, and fire safety watch fees were last updated in 2002. Also, the department does not require deposits for fire safety watches, which could result in a reduction of their accounts receivables. Right now, the department has about $1 million in outstanding accounts receivables from fire safety watches. Approximately 50% of these are over 2 years old. We also noted that about $400,000 in services had been provided to companies that had outstanding delinquent accounts. For example, one company had accounts receivables that had been on the books for over 7 years but continued to receive services. We noticed that the Film LA requires deposits on fire watch safeties or fire safety watches that they coordinate. And if the fire department follows similar procedures, it should result in a reduction of their accounts receivables. In the area of inventories, the department has not conducted inventories for several years. The department has an inventory of approximately $5 million in fire-related supplies in its warehouse, but it has not conducted a physical inventory of those items for at least 5 years. The department also has inventories of equipment supplies totaling $9 million. Again, an inventory has not been conducted for at least 5 years. In fact, the department didn't know the last time it had conducted an inventory. We also noted 86 computer components. These are actual computers, monitors, and printers that were still in the boxes. And some of these had been purchased at least 6 months before. And then finally, the department was not performing a thorough review of its open encumbrances to determine if any could be canceled. Canceling the unneeded encumbrances results in the monies being reverted to the general fund. Between August 2007 and December 2007, the department had identified about $830,000 in encumbrances that could be canceled. Most of these could have been canceled in previous years if the department had conducted a more thorough review. For example, about $400,000 of the $800,000 related to fiscal year 03 and 04 and 04-05 encumbrances, which more than likely could have been canceled a lot earlier than the latter part of 2007.
Thank you. Fire Department? Someone here from the Fire Department to respond to these? And as I understand it, the Fire Department agrees with most of the recommendations and is working to implement them, with the exception of one recommendation, correct, which is the purchasing computer parts for stock. Or I'll let you make your presentation.
Yes, David Yamahata, Assistant Chief, Chief of Staff for the Fire Department. Unfortunately, the staff that deals directly with these issues is currently in a meeting with the Controller's Office as we speak, and addressing some of these specific issues.
Okay. Well, we'll continue this item for the next committee meeting.
Okay.
So
Yeah, we'd
be the
appreciate
first item.
And just on a couple things, maybe, so they'll be prepared next time on that, just on the one on the billing. It's like been my pet peeve, as you know, because the controller did an audit in, I'm looking at, how long ago was that? 2003, 4? And I know we've gone out to bid anyways, so I just really want to see, because it's been 5 years on that one. And the only other thing would be in the response that it looked like that the department was saying it was the controller, and the controller saying it's department on the timekeeping thing, so you might want to be able to respond to that too, because it didn't look like either one was responsible on somebody.
We will address those two issues.
They lost
Thank
any
you.
fire trucks or helicopters, or just the other stuff?
Warehouse.
Not the big items.
No helicopters, no big
No
trucks.
helicopters, but fire trucks.
No fire trucks in stock.
Two hook and ladders missing somewhere.
We'll continue this item to the next AGE meeting, so thank you very much. Thank you. Clerk, I think that is it for us.
No more item, yes, sir.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.